scattered by the wind. His calloused hands gripped the steering wheel as he waited for his daughter Lori to emerge. To any observer, he was just another working-class father. Flannel shirt worn thin at the elbows, steel-toed boots caked with construction site mud, and a face that bore the quiet dignity of a man who earned his living with his hands. But Kenneth Witt was not ordinary. Beneath the carefully constructed facade of a small-town contractor lay secrets that could topple governments and end lives with a single phone call. "Daddy!" Lori's voice cut through his thoughts as the 8-year-old bounded toward the truck, her backpack bouncing against her small frame. Behind her walked Jason, 13 and already showing the rebellious slouch that marked his transition into adolescence. "How was school, princess?" Kenneth asked, his voice carrying the gentle warmth he reserved only for his children. "Mrs. Peterson says I'm the best reader in 2nd grade." Lori beamed, climbing into the cab. Jason slumped into the passenger seat without a word, earbuds already plugging him into a world where his father didn't exist. Kenneth had noticed the distance growing between them over the past year, but he'd attributed it to typical teenage rebellion. He had no idea how deep the betrayal actually ran. The drive home to their modest ranch house on Maple Street was routine. Past the diner where old-timers nursed coffee and complaints, past the hardware store where Kenneth had built his cover identity over 5 years of careful cultivation. He'd become Ken the contractor, the guy who showed up on time, did quality work, and never asked questions. The perfect mask for a man whose real job had been erasing problems for the most powerful people on Earth. Charlene's silver Honda was already in the driveway when they arrived. Through the kitchen window, Kenneth could see his wife of 15 years moving about, preparing dinner. She still turned heads at 38. Auburn hair that caught sunlight like copper wire, green eyes that had once looked at him with genuine love, and a smile that had convinced him to leave his old life behind. That life seemed like a dream now. Code names, midnight extractions, governments that rose and fell based on decisions made in rooms that didn't officially exist. Kenneth had been known by many names in those circles: the Wolf, Shepherd Six, the Cleaner. He'd been the man sent when other operatives failed, when situations required someone willing to cross lines that others wouldn't even acknowledge existed. 5 years ago, he'd walked away from it all. Officially, Kenneth Witt had died in a classified operation in Eastern Europe. Unofficially, he'd been granted something rarer than diamonds in his world: a clean exit. The price had been simple: complete severance from his former life, periodic check-ins with his handler Preston Vaughn, and absolute discretion about his past. He'd thought it was worth it. He'd thought love could heal the hollow places that years of darkness had carved in his soul. "Kenneth," Charlene called from the kitchen, her voice carrying a note he couldn't quite identify. "Can you come in here for a minute?" As he walked through the front door, Lori chattering about her day, Kenneth's trained instincts whispered warnings he chose to ignore. The house felt different, charged with an undercurrent of tension that made the hair on his neck stand up. But this was his family, his sanctuary. He pushed the feeling aside. Charlene stood by the stove, stirring a pot of chili with mechanical precision. She didn't turn when he entered, and her shoulders held a rigid tension that spoke of decisions already made. "We need to talk," she said, still not facing him. "About what?" Kenneth kept his voice neutral, though every alarm in his head was now screaming. "About us. About this life." She finally turned, and Kenneth saw something in her eyes that cut deeper than any blade he'd ever faced. It wasn't anger or even sadness. It was indifference. Cold, complete indifference. "I can't do this anymore, Kenneth. I can't pretend that this is enough." The words hit him like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" "This." She gestured around the kitchen with its cheerful yellow walls and family photos. This small town, paycheck-to-paycheck existence. The broken-down truck, the second-hand furniture, the constant worry about money. "I deserve better than this." Kenneth felt the foundations of his world shifting beneath his feet. "We agreed." "You agreed," Charlene snapped. "You decided we should move here, that you should become a contractor, that we should live like poor people. I never wanted this life, Kenneth. I never wanted any of this." The cruelty in her voice was like ice water in his veins. This wasn't the woman who had once told him that love mattered more than money, who had said she'd follow him anywhere. This was someone else entirely, someone cold and grasping and utterly foreign. "What about the kids?" he asked quietly. "What about them? Jason's already embarrassed by you. Do you see how he won't even talk to you anymore? And Lori, she's young enough to adapt. Children are resilient." Kenneth's hands clenched at his sides. In his former life, he'd killed men for far less than what Charlene was doing to him now. But this was his wife, the mother of his children, the woman he'd given up everything for. "There's someone else," he said. It wasn't a question. Charlene's chin lifted defiantly. "Vincent Cowan owns 3 car dealerships and a construction company. He can give me the life I deserve. The life I should have had all along." Vincent Cowan. Kenneth filed the name away with the cold precision of a man cataloging targets. "How long?" 8 months. No shame, no apology. Just fact delivered like a weather report. 8 months. While Kenneth had been working 18-hour days to save money for Lori's birthday party, his wife had been planning his destruction. While he'd been lying awake at night worrying about making the mortgage payment, she'd been lying awake planning her escape. "I want a divorce," Charlene continued. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. Vincent says he'll help with the legal fees." Kenneth looked at this woman, this stranger wearing his wife's face, and felt something fundamental break inside him. Not his heart, though that was certainly shattered. Something deeper. Something that had kept the old Kenneth leashed and dormant for 5 years. "The kids," he asked again, "will stay with me. Vincent's willing to be a father to them. A better father than you've been." The words were designed to wound, and they found their mark. Kenneth had tried so hard to be a good father, to give his children the stability he'd never had. He'd coached Jason's little league team, taught him to throw a curveball and change a tire. He'd read bedtime stories to Lori every night, built her a treehouse with his own hands, and never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference. But he'd also had to work constantly to make ends meet. The cover identity he'd chosen, a small-time contractor, didn't allow for the kind of wealth that could compete with someone like Vincent Cowan. He'd thought his children understood that love mattered more than money. Apparently, they didn't. "Where are they now?" Kenneth asked. "Jason's at basketball practice. Lori's upstairs doing homework. And after dinner?" Charlene's eyes hardened. "Vincent's taking us to dinner at the country club. He wants to meet the children properly." The casual way she said it, as if introducing her lover to her children while their father stood in the kitchen was the most natural thing in the world, nearly broke Kenneth's legendary self-control. "I see." His voice was very quiet now, carrying undertones that would have made hardened killers take a step back. But Charlene didn't know Kenneth well enough to recognize the danger signs. "I'll pack your things," she said dismissively. "You can stay at the motel until you find something more permanent." Kenneth nodded slowly. "And the house?" "Will be sold. Vincent says the market's good right now. Of course it would be sold." The house Kenneth had bought with money earned by blood and darkness. The house where he'd read bedtime stories and fixed broken toys and tried to build something pure and clean to balance the scales of his past. "I need to get a few things from the garage," Kenneth said. Charlene waved him away like a bothersome fly. "Whatever. Just make it quick. Vincent's picking us up at 6. Kenneth walked to the garage with measured steps, his mind already shifting into the cold, calculating mode that had made him a legend in circles that didn't officially exist. The old Kenneth, the husband and father, was dying. The wolf was stirring from his 5-year slumber. In the back corner of the garage, hidden behind paint cans and garden tools, was a metal toolbox that looked identical to dozens of others. But this one had a false bottom, and in that hidden compartment lay the tools of Kenneth's former trade. Satellite phone, encrypted communicator, access codes that could open doors most people didn't know existed. And most importantly, a business card with a single phone number and no name. Kenneth picked up the satellite phone and dialed a number he'd memorized but never expected to use again. Shepherd 6, a familiar voice answered. "It's been a long time." "Hello, Preston," Kenneth said quietly. "I need to come in from the cold." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Preston Vaughn had been Kenneth's handler for over a decade. He'd been the one to arrange Kenneth's exit, to set up his new identity, to make Kenneth Witt disappear into a life of suburban mediocrity. Is the cover blown? Preston asked. No, but it served its purpose. Kenneth's voice was flat, emotionless. I'm ready to go back to work. Kenneth Witt is dead, he said with finality. He died today in this garage. What rises from his ashes, that's up to you to decide. Another pause. I'll need some time to arrange things. Can you give me 48 hours? I can give you until my family learns exactly what kind of man they've betrayed. Kenneth ended the call and stared at the phone for a long moment. In the distance, he could hear Charlene calling the children for dinner, her voice bright and cheerful as if she hadn't just destroyed 3 lives with casual cruelty. He thought about the look in Jason's eyes lately. Not just teenage rebellion, but something harder. Something that spoke of conversations held behind closed doors, of loyalties poisoned by promises of a better life. And Lori, sweet, innocent Lori, who would be taught to see her father as the poor relation, the failure, the man who couldn't provide the luxuries that Vincent Cowan's money could buy. Kenneth put the phone back in its hiding place and returned to the house. He would play the part of the devastated husband for 2 more days. He would pack his bags and move to the motel and let his family think they had won. But in 48 hours, they would learn the truth about the man they had betrayed. They would discover that Kenneth Witt had never been real, that he was just a role played by someone far more dangerous. And by then, it would be far too late for apologies. Chapter 2. The Price of Betrayal. The Sunset Motel squatted on Route 9 like a cancer, its neon sign flickering between vacancy and darkness with the irregular rhythm of a dying heart. Kenneth sat on the sagging bed in room 14, staring at walls the color of old mustard and listening to the couple next door argue about money through paper-thin walls. 47 hours had passed since his conversation with Preston Vaughn. In that time, Kenneth had watched his family step seamlessly into their new life as if he had never existed. Through carefully placed surveillance, old habits died hard. He'd observed Charlene shopping for a new wardrobe with Vincent's credit card, Jason getting fitted for private school uniforms, and Lori being showered with toys and clothes that Kenneth's contractor wages could never have provided. The speed of their transition was breathtaking in its cruelty. No mourning period, no difficult adjustment. Just immediate gratitude for their elevation to a higher social class. His encrypted phone buzzed. A text message with just an address and a time, midnight. Warehouse District, Pier 7. Kenneth deleted the message and checked his watch. 11:30 p.m. Time to shed the last vestiges of Kenneth Witt forever. The Warehouse District at midnight was a maze of shadows and fog rolling in from the harbor. Kenneth's footsteps echoed off wet pavement as he made his way to Pier 7, where a black sedan waited with its engine running. The driver's window rolled down, revealing Preston Vaughn's weathered face. "Get in," Preston said simply. Kenneth slid into the passenger seat and studied his former handler. Preston looked older, gray threading through his dark hair, new lines around his eyes, but the intelligence in his gaze remained sharp as a blade. "You look like hell," Preston observed. "I feel worse." Kenneth's voice was rough from disuse. He'd barely spoken to anyone in 2 days. "Tell me you have something for me." "I do. But first, I need to know if you're sure about this. Once you're back in the game, there's no returning to suburban anonymity. Kenneth Witt dies tonight, permanently." "Good." He was weak. He let emotion cloud his judgment. Preston studied him for a long moment. "What happened, Ken?" "The reports said you were settled." "Happy." Kenneth's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "My wife decided she deserved better than a contractor's wages. My son decided he was embarrassed by his blue-collar father. My daughter—" He stopped, unable to voice the betrayal of a child who had once worshipped him. "And now they're going to learn what they threw away." Kenneth's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. "They're going to understand exactly what kind of man they betrayed." Preston nodded slowly. "I've arranged a new identity. Marcus Stone, security consultant with an impeccable reputation and connections that reach into very dark places. Your cover story is that you've been working overseas for the past 5 years, primarily in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. High-level corporate security, government contracts, the kind of work that pays extremely well and requires absolute discretion. Assets: offshore accounts totaling $47 million. Property in Switzerland, the Caymans, and Montana. A portfolio of investments that generate approximately $2 million annually in passive income. Kenneth felt the first smile he'd experienced in days cross his face. It wasn't a pleasant expression. And my current assignment? Protecting the family of Vincent Cowan. The irony was so perfect that Kenneth actually laughed, a sound devoid of humor, but rich with dark promise. Explain. Vincent Cowan owns 3 car dealerships and a construction company, as you know. What you don't know is that he also launders money for some very unpleasant people. Russian mob, cartel money, the kind of cash that comes with strings attached. He's been skimming from his partners, thinking he's clever enough to hide it. How much? $3 million over the past 2 years. His partners found out 3 days ago. They've put a contract out on him and anyone close to him. Kenneth's mind raced through the possibilities. So, I'm hired to protect him from the very people he's been stealing from. And my family, his new family, will be considered legitimate targets. Exactly. Your job is to keep Vincent Cowan alive long enough for us to determine exactly how much information he has about his partner's operations. Information that certain government agencies would find very valuable. And if Cowan doesn't cooperate? Preston shrugged. Accidents happen in our line of work. Protective details fail. Sometimes despite our best efforts, the bad guys win. Kenneth understood. He would have complete control over Vincent Cowan's fate, and by extension, his family's fate. The man who had stolen his wife and children would live or die based entirely on Kenneth's whim. When do I start? Tomorrow morning. Vincent has already been contacted by a government intermediary. He's been told that his life is in danger and that a specialist is being assigned to protect him. He's expecting Marcus Stone at 9 a.m. Preston handed Kenneth a leather portfolio. Your new identity documents, credit cards, and a dossier on Vincent Cowan's operations. There's also a psychological profile of your target. Kenneth flipped through the documents, absorbing the details with professional efficiency. Vincent Cowan was 42, divorced once, no children of his own. His business empire was built on legitimate enterprises that served as fronts for money laundering. He was vain, arrogant, and believed his charm could get him out of any situation. Most importantly, he was completely unprepared for the kind of danger he had invited into his life, both from his criminal partners and from the man whose family he had stolen. There's one more thing, Preston said quietly. Your family doesn't know about the contract yet. As far as they're concerned, Vincent is just a successful businessman who's courting your ex-wife. They have no idea they're potentially caught in the crossfire of a mob war. How long before they find out? That depends on how well you do your job. If Vincent stays alive and keeps his mouth shut, his partners might be satisfied with taking their money back and calling it even. If he dies or disappears, Preston shrugged. His associates will assume someone is trying to eliminate their operation. They'll start killing anyone connected to Vincent, just to be safe. Kenneth closed the portfolio and looked out at the dark water. So I hold their lives in my hands. You hold everyone's life in your hands. Vincent's, Charlene's, the children's. They just don't know it yet. And my cover story for being in town, Marcus Stone has been hired by a government contractor to investigate potential security threats in the area. It's legitimate enough to stand up to scrutiny, vague enough to explain your presence anywhere you need to be. Kenneth nodded. Where am I staying? The Grandview Hotel, penthouse suite. Marcus Stone doesn't slum it in roadside motels. Preston reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a set of keys. Your car is in the hotel garage. Black Mercedes S-Class, fully equipped. Everything Marcus Stone would drive. Kenneth took the keys and stepped out of the sedan. Preston, yeah. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might not like where this leads. Kenneth smiled that cold, predatory smile again. I'm counting on it. As the sedan pulled away, Kenneth stood alone on the pier, breathing in the salt air and feeling the old familiar weight of purpose settling on his shoulders. Kenneth Witt was dead. Marcus Stone was about to be born. And Vincent Cowan, The man who thought he had won everything was about to discover that he had actually signed his own death warrant. Kenneth walked back toward the city lights, already planning his first move. Tomorrow, he would introduce himself to the man who had stolen his family. He would smile and shake Vincent's hand and promise to keep him safe from the monsters who wanted him dead. What Vincent wouldn't know was that he had just invited the most dangerous monster of all into his life. And this monster had very personal reasons for wanting to watch Vincent Cowan's world burn. Chapter 3. The Theater of War. Vincent Cowan's construction company occupied a gleaming steel and glass building in the business district, a monument to success that screamed money and power to anyone driving past. Kenneth, now Marcus Stone, parked his Mercedes in a visitor's space and studied the building with professional interest. He'd spent the previous night in the penthouse suite, transforming himself into his new identity. Gone were the work boots and flannel shirts of Kenneth Witt. Marcus Stone wore Italian leather shoes, a tailored charcoal suit, and a watch that cost more than Kenneth's pickup truck. His hair was styled, his nails manicured, and his bearing carried the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. The lobby was all marble and brass, designed to impress clients and intimidate competitors. Kenneth approached the reception desk, where a young woman with perfect teeth smiled at him with practiced professionalism. "I'm Marcus Stone," he said, his voice carrying the cultured tones of expensive education. "I have a 9 o'clock appointment with Mr. Cowan." "Of course, Mr. Stone. Mr. Cowan is expecting you. 23rd floor, corner office." The elevator ride gave Kenneth time to center himself, to push down the rage that threatened to consume him and replace it with cold, calculating purpose. He was no longer the betrayed husband seeking revenge. He was Marcus Stone, security specialist, here to do a job. Vincent Cowan's office was exactly what Kenneth had expected. Oversized everything, from the mahogany desk to the leather chairs to the ego of the man behind it all. Vincent himself was tall and lean, with silver hair perfectly styled and the kind of tan that spoke of weekends on expensive boats. He was, Kenneth admitted grudgingly, exactly the kind of man who would appeal to someone like Charlene. "Mr. Stone," Vincent rose from behind his desk, hand extended and smile blazing with confidence. "I have to say, I wasn't expecting someone quite so distinguished. The government description made you sound like some kind of military grunt." Kenneth shook the offered hand, noting the soft skin of a man who had never done real work, and smiled back. "I find it useful when people underestimate me, Mr. Cowan. It makes my job easier. Please call me Vincent. And your job is keeping me alive, right? I have to admit, this whole situation seems a bit surreal. I mean, I run legitimate businesses. I've never been involved in anything that would warrant death threats." The lie rolled off Vincent's tongue with practiced ease. Kenneth filed away this confirmation of the man's dishonesty and took a seat in one of the oversized chairs. "I'm afraid the people who want you dead don't see it that way," Kenneth said calmly. "My sources indicate that certain business associates of yours believe you've been creative with their financial arrangements." Vincent's confident smile flickered for just a moment, a micro-expression that confirmed he knew exactly what Kenneth was talking about. "I have no idea what you mean." "Of course not. That's why I'm here." Kenneth leaned back in his chair, projecting the calm competence of a man who dealt with life-threatening situations as casually as most people discuss the weather. "Tell me about your family situation. I understand you're involved with a woman who has children." "Charlene, yes. Beautiful woman. We're quite serious about each other." Vincent's smile returned, smug and possessive. "Her children are wonderful. The boy's a natural athlete, and the little girl is bright as a whip. They deserve better than what they had." Kenneth's jaw tightened fractionally, the only sign of the fury building inside him. What did they have before? A father who couldn't provide for them properly. Blue-collar type, you know? Good enough man, I suppose, but limited. Charlene says he was always struggling to make ends meet, working all the time just to keep their heads above water. The children were starting to feel embarrassed by their situation. Each word was a knife between Kenneth's ribs, delivered with casual cruelty by a man who had no idea he was talking to the father he was describing. Kenneth forced himself to remain perfectly still, perfectly calm. I see. And where is this former husband now? Moved out to some fleabag motel. Charlene says he took it pretty hard, but honestly, she's better off without him. The children certainly are. I can give them opportunities their biological father never could. Kenneth nodded thoughtfully. About these children, if there's a credible threat against you, they could be considered targets as well. Criminals don't typically make distinctions between blood family and romantic attachments. For the first time, Vincent looked genuinely concerned. You're saying Charlene and the kids could be in danger? I'm saying that the people who want you dead have a very simple philosophy. Eliminate the target and anyone who might seek revenge later. It's more efficient than leaving loose ends. Vincent's tone seemed to pale slightly. What kind of protection are we talking about? Complete security overhaul. Your home, your business, your daily routines. I'll need access to your personal schedule, your phone records, your financial information. Everything. My financial information? Why? Kenneth's smile was thin and cold. Because money is usually what gets people killed in situations like this. I need to understand exactly how deep in you are so I can assess the threat level accurately. Vincent shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Some of my business arrangements are confidential. Mr. Cowan, let me be very clear about something. I don't care about your business ethics or your tax situation. I care about keeping you alive long enough to enjoy whatever money you've acquired. But I can't protect you from threats I don't understand. So you can either tell me everything, or you can wait for your enemies to find you and hope they're feeling merciful. The threat was delivered in the same calm, professional tone Kenneth had been using throughout the conversation, but something in his eyes must have communicated the seriousness of the situation. Vincent nodded reluctantly. Fine, but this information doesn't go anywhere, right? Client confidentiality? Absolutely. Dead clients don't pay their bills. Vincent spent the next hour detailing his money laundering operation with the reluctance of a man confessing his sins. $3 million skimmed over 2 years, hidden in offshore accounts that he thought were untraceable. Partners who had trusted him with their dirty money and were now planning to kill him for his betrayal. Kenneth listened with professional interest, mentally cataloging every detail. Vincent Cowan wasn't just a thief. He was a stupid thief who had stolen from people who collected debts with bullets and buried their problems in shallow graves. I need to meet your family, Kenneth said when Vincent finished his confession. If I'm going to protect them, I need to assess their security consciousness and establish protocols. Of course, we're all having dinner tonight at the country club. Why don't you join us? I can introduce you as a business associate. Perfect. Kenneth stood and straightened his jacket. I'll need a complete guest list for tonight, as well as the layout of the club and the names of all staff who will be working. I'll also need to inspect your home and establish security protocols there. Jesus, is all that really necessary? Kenneth looked at Vincent with the cold stare of a professional killer. Mr. Cowan, 3 days ago, a very dangerous organization put a price on your head. Yesterday, they started moving assets into position. Tonight, they'll begin implementing their plan. Everything I do from this moment forward is absolutely necessary. The only question is whether you want to be alive next week to regret the decisions that put you in this position. Vincent swallowed hard and nodded. Whatever you need. Excellent. I'll pick you up at your home at 6 o'clock. We'll drive to the club together so I can assess potential threats along the route. Kenneth shook Vincent's hand again and left the office, his mind already racing ahead to the evening's possibilities. Tonight, he would come face to face with Charlene and the children for the first time since their betrayal. They would see him as Marcus Stone, successful security specialist, a man with obvious wealth and power. They would see what they had thrown away when they chose Vincent Cowan's money over Kenneth Witt's love. But more importantly, tonight would begin the careful choreography of Vincent Cowan's destruction. Kenneth would protect him from outside threats while systematically dismantling his life from within. Every security measure would become a trap. Every protection would become a prison. Vincent Cowan thought he had won Charlene and the children through superior wealth and status. But he had actually stolen them from a man who killed for a living and had never learned to forgive. Tonight, the real war would begin. Chapter 4. face to face with ghosts. The Grandview Country Club squatted on 50 acres of manicured perfection, its colonial facade and rolling golf course screaming old money and exclusivity. Kenneth, Marcus Stone, drove his Mercedes through the gates at precisely 7 p.m., having spent the previous hour conducting security sweeps of the building and grounds. Vincent sat in the passenger seat, nervously adjusting his tie and making small talk that Kenneth ignored. The man had no idea that his protector was planning his destruction with the same methodical precision he used to plan security protocols. "There they are," Vincent said as they pulled into the circular drive. Kenneth's breath caught in his throat despite his professional composure. Charlene stood on the club steps wearing an emerald green dress that hugged her figure and caught the light from the building's facade. Beside her stood Jason, uncomfortable in a blazer and tie that probably cost more than most teenagers' entire wardrobes. And Lori. Lori wore a pink dress with white tights and patent leather shoes, her hair done up in careful curls that framed her face like a halo. She looked like a different child, not the daughter who had run to his truck each day after school, but a small stranger being groomed for a world Kenneth had never been able to provide. "Beautiful family," Kenneth said, his voice perfectly controlled. "They are, aren't they? Charlene's quite the catch. Can't believe her ex-husband let her slip away." Kenneth parked the car and stepped out, his movements fluid and confident. As they approached the steps, Charlene's eyes widened slightly as she took in Marcus Stone's expensive clothes and obvious sophistication. "Charlene, kids, I'd like you to meet Marcus Stone," Vincent said proudly. "He's a security consultant who's going to be working with me for a while." Kenneth extended his hand to Charlene, noting the way her fingers lingered against his and the calculating look in her eyes as she assessed his obvious wealth. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Douglas," she said quickly. "Charlene Douglas. I've gone back to my maiden name." The lie was smooth and practiced. She was still legally Charlene Witt, would be until the divorce was finalized, but she was already erasing Kenneth from her identity. "And these must be your children," Kenneth said, turning to Jason and Lori. Jason mumbled a greeting without meeting Kenneth's eyes, but Lori stepped forward with the confidence that her new clothes and circumstances had apparently given her. "I'm Lori," she said brightly. "Are you here for dinner too?" "I am indeed, Miss Lori. Your mother's friend Vincent has asked me to join you." Kenneth studied his children with professional detachment, noting the changes that 2 days of Vincent's influence had wrought. Jason's posture was different, less slouched, more confident. His shoes alone probably cost $500. Lori's innocence remained, but there was a new awareness in her eyes, an understanding that money meant options and options meant power. They had been bought, both of them, as easily as Vincent had bought their mother. "Shall we go in?" Vincent asked, placing a possessive hand on the small of Charlene's back. The country club's dining room was everything Kenneth had expected. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and the hushed conversations of people who had never worried about money. The maitre d' led them to a corner table with excellent sight lines, exactly what Kenneth would have requested for security purposes. "So, Marcus," Charlene said once they were seated, "what kind of security work do you do?" "Corporate protection, primarily. I specialize in situations where executives face credible threats from business rivals or criminal organizations." Charlene's eyes sharpened with interest. "That sounds exciting and profitable." "It can be both. The clients who need my services tend to compensate well for discretion and competence." "Have you always done this kind of work?" Jason asked, speaking for the first time since they'd been introduced. Kenneth met his sons, eyes across the table. "I spent several years in military special operations before transitioning to private sector work. The skills transfer quite well." "Like what kind of skills?" Lori piped up. "Languages, tactical planning, risk assessment. The ability to remain calm under pressure." Kenneth's voice was casual, but his words carried undertones that Vincent missed entirely. "Marcus served in some very dangerous places," Vincent added importantly. "Eastern Europe, the Middle East. The kind of assignments that require serious security clearance." Charlene leaned forward slightly, her interest obvious. "That must have been lonely work. Are you married?" The question hit Kenneth like a physical blow. but his expression remained pleasantly neutral. The demands of the job made it difficult to maintain personal relationships. I'm sorry, Charlene said with practiced sympathy. It must be hard to sacrifice so much for your career. Kenneth's smile was thin as a razor blade. Sometimes the things we think we're sacrificing turn out not to have been worth keeping. The conversation continued through dinner, with Vincent preening like a peacock as he showed off his new family and his expensive security consultant. Charlene played the perfect hostess, charming and interested, while the children adapted to their new environment with the resilience that Vincent had mentioned. Kenneth watched it all with the detached fascination of a scientist observing lab rats. They had all slipped so easily into this new life, as if their previous existence had been nothing more than an unpleasant dream from which they had finally awakened. Marcus, you simply must see Vincent's new house, Charlene said as dessert arrived. It's absolutely gorgeous. Nothing like the cramped little place we were stuck in before. I'd be happy to, Kenneth replied. In fact, I'll need to conduct a security assessment of the property. Given the nature of the threats Vincent faces, his home will require significant upgrades. What kind of upgrades? Jason asked. Security cameras, motion detectors, reinforced entry points. Possibly a safe room if the threat level warrants it. Vincent nodded importantly. Money's no object when it comes to protecting my family. His family. Kenneth's hands clenched imperceptibly under the table. These were still his children, still legally his wife, but Vincent spoke of them as if they were possessions he had purchased. Speaking of protection, Kenneth said casually, I should mention that threats in situations like this often extend to family members. Anyone close to Vincent could potentially become a target. Charlene's face paled slightly. You mean the children? I mean anyone the opposition might use for leverage. Wife, children, even ex-spouses in some cases. Vincent frowned. Ex-spouses? You mean Charlene's former husband? Criminals don't typically make fine distinctions about legal relationships. If they think hurting someone will cause Vincent pain, that person becomes a potential target. Kenneth watched Charlene's face as the implication sank in. She was thinking about Kenneth Witt, alone in his motel room, completely unaware that he might be in danger because of her new relationship. Maybe we should warn him, she said quietly. Warn who? Vincent asked sharply. Ken, my ex-husband. If he could be in danger because of us. Absolutely not, Vincent said firmly. We're not dragging him into this. Besides, what's he going to do? Hide in his motel room? The man can barely afford cable television. Kenneth felt the old familiar rage building in his chest, but his voice remained perfectly calm. Actually, Mr. Cowan, involving the ex-husband might not be a bad idea. If these people are thorough, and they usually are, they've already identified him as a potential pressure point. Better to bring him into the security loop than leave him as a vulnerability. No, Vincent said flatly. I won't have that man anywhere near my family. His family. There was again. Kenneth memorized the words, filed them away with all the other insults and injuries he would repay with interest. As you wish, Kenneth said calmly. Though I should point out that if something happens to him, it will traumatize the children and potentially destabilize the entire family dynamic. Lori looked up from her ice cream. What would happen to Daddy? The word hit Kenneth like a bullet to the chest. She still called him Daddy, even after 2 days of Vincent's largesse. Nothing's going to happen to your father, sweetheart, Charlene said quickly. Mr. Stone is just being thorough. Actually, Kenneth said, there are some precautions we could take. I could arrange for discreet surveillance of Mr. Witt, just to ensure his safety. It would be a minimal expense compared to the overall security package. Vincent looked annoyed, but nodded reluctantly. Fine, but I don't want him knowing about it. The last thing I need is him thinking he's some kind of hero in this situation. Kenneth's smile was cold as winter moonlight. Don't worry, Mr. Cowan. He'll never know I'm watching him. The irony was so perfect that Kenneth almost laughed out loud. Vincent Cowan had just paid him to protect the very man whose family he had stolen. The man he had humiliated and dismissed as a failure. The man who was going to destroy him. As dinner wound down and they prepared to leave, Kenneth made his final move of the evening. There is one more security consideration, he said casually. Given the sophistication of the threat, I'll need to maintain close proximity to the family for the next several weeks. I'll be renting a house in your neighborhood, something with good sight lines to your property. How close? Charlene asked. Close enough to respond to any emergency within 90 seconds. Vincent nodded approvingly. Whatever you think is best. Spare no expense. Kenneth almost smiled. Vincent Cowan was paying him to move into their neighborhood, to watch their house, to become part of their daily lives. He was funding his own destruction and thanking Kenneth for the privilege. As they left the restaurant, Lori tugged on Kenneth's sleeve. Mr. Stone, will you really keep us safe? Kenneth looked down at his daughter, his beautiful, innocent daughter who had no idea she was talking to the father she thought she'd left behind. I promise you, Lori, he said quietly, that I will do everything in my power to protect what matters most. She smiled and skipped ahead to catch up with Jason and Charlene. Kenneth watched her go, his heart breaking and hardening simultaneously. He would protect her. He would protect both his children. But he would also teach them the cost of betrayal, the price of choosing money over loyalty. And Vincent Cowan, the man who thought he had won everything, would learn that some victories come with consequences beyond imagination. The war was about to begin in earnest. Chapter 5. The News Titans. The house Kenneth rented was a modest colonial on Elmwood Drive, exactly 3 houses down from Vincent Cowan's newly purchased mansion. From his second-floor window, he had perfect sight lines to every entrance and most of the windows of what had become his target's fortress. It had been a week since the dinner at the country club, 7 days of careful positioning and patient observation. Kenneth had established himself as Marcus Stone with methodical precision. Expensive furniture delivered and arranged, high-end security equipment installed, and cover stories meticulously crafted for every neighbor who stopped by to introduce themselves. To the outside world, Marcus Stone was exactly what he appeared to be, a wealthy security consultant protecting a local businessman from unspecified threats. The fact that the businessman in question had stolen the consultant's family was known only to Kenneth himself. His morning routine had become a carefully choreographed dance of surveillance and psychological warfare. At 6:30 a.m., he would position himself at his kitchen window with a cup of coffee and a high-powered telephoto lens, watching as his former family began their day. Vincent was usually first up, emerging from the master bedroom in silk pajamas that probably cost more than Kenneth's monthly motel rent had been. He would pad downstairs to collect the newspaper and coffee, master of his domain and blissfully unaware that every movement was being cataloged by hostile eyes. Charlene would appear next, wrapped in a robe that Kenneth didn't recognize, new, expensive, purchased with Vincent's money. She moved through the kitchen with the confidence of a woman who had finally found her proper place in the world, no longer worried about grocery bills or mortgage payments. The children were last. Jason had adapted to private school with remarkable ease, trading his public school friends for the sons and daughters of Vincent's wealthy associates. He carried himself differently now, shoulders back, chin up, the bearing of someone who belonged in exclusive circles. But it was Lori who broke Kenneth's heart most thoroughly. His 8-year-old daughter had become a small princess, dressed each morning in designer clothes and driven to private school in Vincent's luxury SUV. She seemed happy, genuinely happy, in a way that cut Kenneth deeper than any blade. This morning's surveillance revealed something new. A black Escalade with tinted windows had been parked across the street from Vincent's house for the past 3 days. Kenneth recognized the occupants from the dossier Preston had provided: Viktor Kozlov and Dmitry Petrov, enforcers for the Russian organization that Vincent had been stealing from. They were getting impatient. Kenneth's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Principals growing restless. Timeline accelerating. Suggest immediate action. He deleted the message and finished his coffee, mind racing through possibilities. The Russians weren't known for their patience, and $3 million was serious money even to them. If they decided to move against Vincent tonight, Charlene and the children would be sleeping under the same roof. His family would be in the crossfire. Kenneth made his decision with the cold calculation that had made him legendary in his former profession. He had originally planned to let the situation develop slowly, to savor Vincent's gradual destruction over weeks or months. But if the Russians forced the timeline, he would adapt. Today, Vincent Cowan would learn exactly how much danger he had brought into his new family's life. At 9 a.m. sharp, Kenneth rang the doorbell of Vincent's mansion. The door was answered by Maria, the housekeeper Vincent had hired to maintain his image of success. "Mr. Stone," she said with a relieved smile. "Mr. Cowan is in his office. He's been very nervous this morning." Kenneth found Vincent pacing behind his oversized desk, still in his silk pajamas and looking like a man who hadn't slept well. "Marcus, thank God you're here. I think someone's been watching the house." "The Black Escalade," Kenneth said calmly. "Viktor Kozlov and Dmitry Petrov. I've been monitoring them for the past 72 hours. Vincent's face went pale. "You know who they are?" "I know everything about them. Their methods, their capabilities, their timeline for action." Kenneth's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. "They're here to kill you, Vincent. The only question is when." Jesus Christ. Vincent collapsed into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 42 years. "What do we do?" "We have two options. We can arrange for your immediate relocation to a secure facility until this situation resolves itself, or we can end the threat permanently." "End it? What do you mean, end it?" Kenneth's smile was thin and predatory. "I mean, we kill them before they kill you." Vincent stared at him in shock. "We can't just... these are people. Human beings. Human beings who have spent the past week planning the murder of your entire family," Kenneth replied coldly. "Viktor Kozlov has personally killed 14 people that we know of. Dmitry Petrov specializes in making deaths look accidental. They're not here to negotiate, Vincent. They're here to erase you and anyone who might seek revenge later. But the police won't arrive in time to save you. By the time you call 911, you'll already be dead." Kenneth leaned forward, his eyes boring into Vincent's. "These men are professionals. They've killed families before. Husbands, wives, children. It makes no difference to them." Vincent's hands shook as he reached for his coffee cup. "What about Charlene and the kids? Can we get them somewhere safe?" "Where?" Kenneth asked. "Your house is being watched. Any attempt to leave will be seen as evidence that you're running. That would accelerate their timeline from days to hours. So what do you suggest?" Kenneth stood and walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured yard where his children played just a week ago. "I suggest we go on the offensive. Tonight, when they make their move, we'll be ready for them." "We? I'm not a killer. Marcus, I'm a businessman." Kenneth turned back to Vincent, his expression carefully neutral. "You're a businessman who stole $3 million from the Russian mob. You forfeited any claim to innocence the moment you decided their money was yours." The words hit their mark. Vincent flinched as if Kenneth had struck him physically. "I need guarantees," Vincent said quietly. "I need to know that Charlene and the children will be safe." "I can guarantee their safety," Kenneth replied, "but only if you follow my instructions exactly. No deviation, no second-guessing, no attempting to contact the authorities. You do exactly what I tell you when I tell you, or your new family dies tonight." Vincent nodded reluctantly. "What do you need me to do?" Kenneth pulled out his phone and showed Vincent a photograph of a storage unit key. "This key opens Unit 47 at the Riverside Storage Facility. Inside that unit, you'll find $3 million in cash, the exact amount you stole from your partners." Vincent's eyes widened. "How did you?" "I'm very good at my job," Kenneth said simply. "Tonight at midnight, you're going to take that money and deliver it to Viktor and Dmitry. You're going to apologize profusely, explain that it was all a misunderstanding, and offer to pay an additional $1 million in interest for their inconvenience." "I don't have an additional $1 million. Kenneth's smile was cold as Arctic ice. "Yes, you do. You just haven't accessed it yet." He handed Vincent a manila envelope. Inside, you'll find account numbers and access codes for offshore accounts containing exactly $1 million. Consider it a loan against future services. Vincent opened the envelope with trembling fingers, staring at documents that represented more money than he'd ever seen in one place. "I don't understand. Why are you helping me like this?" Kenneth's eyes were flat and emotionless as a shark's. Because dead clients don't pay their bills, Vincent, and because I've grown quite fond of your family. I'd hate to see anything happen to them. The truth was far more complex and infinitely more dangerous, but Vincent would never understand it. He was a small man who thought in small terms, incapable of grasping the scope of the destruction that Kenneth was orchestrating around him. What happens after I give them the money? If they accept it, you live. If they don't, Kenneth shrugged. Then we implement option 2, which is, you really don't want to know. Kenneth left Vincent to contemplate his options and drove back to his rented house. From his window, he could see Charlene working in the garden while Lori played on the swing set that Vincent had installed in the backyard. They looked peaceful, content, utterly unaware that their lives hung in the balance. His secure phone buzzed again. Another message from Preston. Situation deteriorating. Russians planning move tonight. Suggest immediate extraction of asset. Kenneth deleted the message without responding. Preston didn't understand that this had stopped being about the mission the moment Kenneth had seen his family at the country club. This had become personal in ways that no government handler could comprehend. Tonight, Viktor Kozlov and Dmitry Petrov would learn what happened when professional killers met someone who killed for love instead of money. Tonight, Vincent Cowan would discover the true cost of stealing another man's family. And tonight, Kenneth would begin the final phase of his revenge, a reckoning that would leave his betrayers with nothing but ashes and regret. Chapter 6. The Edge of the Abyss. The meeting was set for midnight at the abandoned Riverside warehouse, a location Kenneth had chosen for its isolation and excellent acoustics. Screams carried well in empty buildings. He arrived at 11:30 p.m., giving himself time to position surveillance equipment and ensure that every word spoken would be recorded for posterity. Vincent's Mercedes pulled into the parking lot at exactly midnight, headlights cutting through the darkness like searching fingers. Behind him, the black Escalade followed at a discreet distance, its occupants no doubt pleased that their target had finally decided to make himself available. Kenneth watched from his concealment on the warehouse's second floor, night vision goggles allowing him to track every movement with perfect clarity. Vincent emerged from his car carrying a black duffel bag that contained $4 million, $3 million in stolen money, plus $1 million in interest that Kenneth had so generously provided. Viktor Kozlov and Dmitry Petrov stepped out of the Escalade with the casual confidence of apex predators. Both men were large, broad-shouldered, and moved with the fluid economy of motion that marked professional killers. They wore dark suits and expressions of cold amusement, clearly enjoying the fear that radiated from Vincent in visible waves. "Mr. Cowan," Victor said in accented English, "how good of you to finally accept our invitation." "I brought the money," Vincent said quickly, his voice cracking with terror. "All of it plus interest. $3 million you gave me, plus $1 million extra for the inconvenience." Dmitry stepped forward and unzipped the duffel bag, examining the neat stacks of currency with professional interest. "This appears to be correct amount," he said in heavily accented English. "Good," Victor replied, but his smile held no warmth. "Unfortunately, Mr. Cowan, money is no longer sufficient to resolve this situation." Vincent's face went white. "What do you mean? I brought everything I owe you, plus extra. We're square now, right?" "Square." Victor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Mr. Cowan, you stole from us. You thought you were clever enough to hide your theft, smart enough to make fools of dangerous men. Money alone cannot repair such insult. Then what do you want?" "We want you to understand consequences of your actions," Dmitry said, pulling a pistol from his jacket. "We want your family to understand these consequences as well." Kenneth felt ice water flood his veins. They weren't just planning to kill Vincent. They intended to murder Charlene and the children as well. His children, his family. The cold rage that had been building for days suddenly crystallized into something harder than diamond and twice as sharp. These men had signed their own death warrants the moment they threatened his family. "Please," Vincent begged, falling to his knees. "Please don't hurt them. They don't know anything about this. They're innocent." "No one is innocent, Mr. Cowan," Victor said philosophically. Your woman chose to be with thief. Your children benefit from stolen money. They share your guilt. Kenneth had heard enough. He moved with liquid silence through the warehouse shadows, closing distance while the Russians focused on their terrified victim. Every step was calculated, every breath controlled, every movement designed to bring him within striking range without detection. Actually, Kenneth said, stepping into the circle of light cast by Vincent's headlights, I think you gentlemen have made a serious miscalculation. All three men spun toward the sound of his voice. Victor and Dmitri immediately raised their weapons, training them on this unexpected intruder who had materialized from the darkness like a ghost. Who are you? Victor demanded. Marcus Stone, Kenneth replied calmly, keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. Mr. Cowan's security consultant. Security consultant? Dmitri laughed harshly. You are very bad at your job if you allow your client to walk in a trap. Kenneth's smile was cold as winter starlight. Who says this is a trap for him? The words hung in the air for a heartbeat before Kenneth moved. Years of training compressed into 3 seconds of explosive violence that left Viktor Kozlov unconscious on the concrete floor and Dmitry Petrov disarmed and pinned against the warehouse wall with a combat knife pressed against his throat. Jesus Christ! Vincent gasped, staring at the tableau in shock. How did you? Be quiet, Kenneth said without taking his eyes off Dmitri. Gentlemen, we seem to have reached an impasse. You want to kill my client and his family. I want to keep them alive. I propose a compromise. What kind of compromise? Dmitri asked, his English suddenly much clearer now that adrenaline had sharpened his focus. You take your money and leave town. Tonight. You never come back. You never contact Mr. Cowan again. And you forget this entire situation ever happened. And if we refuse? Kenneth's knife pressed slightly deeper, drawing a thin line of blood. Then you die here in this warehouse, and your bodies disappear so completely that even your mothers will never know what happened to you. You are one man against organization of many. You cannot protect him forever. You're absolutely right, Kenneth agreed. But I can kill you both right now, tonight, and then I can track down everyone you've ever worked with and kill them too. I can make your entire organization bleed until they decide that $4 million isn't worth the casualties I'll inflict. Something in Kenneth's voice, a quality that spoke of absolute certainty and unlimited capacity for violence, made Dmitri's eyes widen with recognition. You're not security consultant, he said quietly. No, Kenneth agreed. I'm something much worse. I'm a man protecting his family. The implications of that statement settled over the warehouse like a cold fog. Vincent stared at Kenneth in confusion, not understanding the subtext, but Dmitri got it immediately. This wasn't about money or professional obligation. This was personal in the most dangerous way possible. We take money and leave, Dmitri said quickly. No more contact with Mr. Cowan. Debt is settled. Smart choice. Kenneth stepped back, keeping the knife visible but no longer actively threatening. Help your friend to his feet. You have 30 minutes to be out of the city limits. Dmitri moved carefully to Victor, who was beginning to regain consciousness with the slow, painful movements of a man who had been struck by a professional. Together, they collected their money and stumbled toward their vehicle. Mr. Stone, Victor called out just before reaching the Escalade. What you have done tonight, it will not be forgotten. Kenneth's smile was predatory and filled with dark promise. I'm counting on it. The Escalade disappeared into the night, carrying its cargo of defeated killers and their recovered money. Vincent stood in the sudden silence, staring at Kenneth as if seeing him for the first time. Who are you? Vincent asked quietly. And don't tell me you're just a security consultant. Security consultants don't move like that. They don't talk like that. Kenneth considered his answer carefully. I'm someone who takes his responsibilities very seriously, Mr. Cowan, especially when those responsibilities involve protecting innocent children. But how did you know they were planning to kill Charlene and the kids? How did you even know about tonight? Because it's my job to know things, Kenneth replied. Because I've been watching and listening and preparing for this moment since the day you hired me. Vincent processed this information with the slow comprehension of a man whose worldview had just been shattered. "You've been watching us? All of us. Every day. Every night. Every moment since I took this assignment." Kenneth's voice was flat, emotionless. "I know that Jason has been having nightmares about his biological father. I know that Lori still cries for her daddy when she thinks no one can hear her. I know that Charlene lies awake wondering if she made the right choice." Each revelation hit Vincent like a physical blow. The security consultant he'd hired to protect his new family had been documenting their private moments, their vulnerabilities, their doubts. "Why are you telling me this?" Kenneth stepped closer, close enough that Vincent could see the cold fury burning in his eyes. "Because I want you to understand something very important, Mr. Cowan. Tonight, I saved your life and the lives of your new family. I eliminated a threat that would have destroyed everything you think you've built. And I'm grateful. But," Kenneth continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "the Russians weren't the only threat you need to worry about. There are other dangers, other enemies you've made. People who won't be satisfied with just money. People who want something far more valuable than cash." "What are you talking about?" Kenneth's smile was terrible in its implications. "I'm talking about the price of stealing another man's family, Vincent. I'm talking about consequences you haven't even begun to imagine." The truth hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon, but Vincent was too shocked and frightened to grasp its full meaning. He saw only what Kenneth wanted him to see: a security consultant with dangerous connections and unlimited capacity for violence. He had no idea he was looking at the husband he had cuckolded, the father whose children he had stolen, the man whose life he had destroyed with casual cruelty. "Get in your car," Kenneth said quietly. "Drive home. Kiss your new family goodnight. And remember that everything you have exists only because I allow it to exist." Vincent stumbled to his Mercedes with the unsteady gait of a man who had looked into an abyss and found something looking back. He drove away into the night, leaving Kenneth alone in the warehouse with his thoughts and his plans. The Russians had been dealt with, but they were just the opening move in a much larger game. Kenneth pulled out his secure phone and sent a single message to Preston: "External threat neutralized." Proceeding to Phase 2. Phase 2 would be far more subtle than tonight's violence, far more personally devastating than the threat of Russian killers. Phase 2 would involve destroying Vincent Cowan from the inside out, stripping away everything he thought he had won until nothing remained but ashes and regret. Kenneth walked out of the warehouse and into the night, already planning the next moves in his carefully orchestrated revenge. Vincent thought tonight had been about protection. He had no idea it had actually been about preparation for his complete destruction. Chapter 7. The Unraveling begins. 3 days after the warehouse confrontation, Kenneth received a phone call that changed everything. He was reviewing surveillance footage from Vincent's house when his secure line buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. "Marcus Stone," he answered with professional caution. "Mr. Stone, this is General Malcolm Keith, commanding officer of Fort Braxton. I believe we need to talk." Kenneth's blood turned to ice water. General Keith was the man whose name had appeared in his past life's classified files, the officer who had recommended Kenneth for his most sensitive assignments. If Keith was calling, it meant his cover was compromised. "I'm afraid you have a wrong number, General." "Cut the shit, Shepard 6. I know exactly who you are and what you're doing in my jurisdiction. We need to meet. Tonight." The line went dead, leaving Kenneth staring at his phone with the expression of a man who had just felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Only a handful of people knew his old operational designation, and most of them were dead. If General Keith was one of the few still alive, it meant Kenneth's carefully constructed new identity was built on foundations far less solid than he had believed. The meeting was set for 2,100 hours at the abandoned airfield outside town, neutral ground that neither man could control completely. Kenneth arrived first, positioning himself with clear sight lines and multiple escape routes, every instinct screaming that this was a trap. General Keith emerged from the darkness precisely on time, accompanied by 2 soldiers who moved with the fluid precision of special operations veterans. The general himself was exactly what Kenneth remembered: tall, silver-haired, and radiating the kind of authority that came from decades of command. "Hello, Keith said as he approached. You look good for a dead man. General, Kenneth kept his voice neutral, his hands visible but ready to move if the situation deteriorated. What brings you to my little corner of suburban hell? Your little corner is about to become very crowded, Keith replied grimly. We have a problem, and unfortunately, you're at the center of it. Explain. Keith nodded to one of his soldiers, who handed him a tablet computer. The screen showed surveillance photos of Kenneth entering and leaving Vincent Cowan's house, taken from multiple angles over the past week. Someone's been watching you watch your target, Keith said. Someone with very sophisticated equipment and unlimited patience. Kenneth studied the photos with professional interest. The angles and timing suggested a highly trained surveillance team, probably government-sponsored. Who? We're not sure yet. The equipment signature suggests foreign intelligence, possibly Chinese or Russian, but the techniques are American. Whoever they are, they know who you really are. How is that possible? My extraction was clean. My new identity was bulletproof. Keith's expression was grim. Your new identity was bulletproof 5 years ago. But someone's been digging, asking questions about operatives who disappeared around the time you went dark. They've connected enough dots to put you on their radar. Kenneth absorbed this information with the cold calculation that had kept him alive through a dozen impossible missions. If his cover was blown, it meant Charlene and the children were in danger. Not from Russian gangsters or Vincent's business enemies, but from intelligence agencies that settled their accounts with bullets and car bombs. What do they want? That's the interesting question, Keith said. If they wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. If they wanted to expose you, they'd have done it by now. Which means they want something else, such as information about your old missions, your handlers, the operations you ran during your active years. You were involved in some very sensitive work, Ken, the kind of work that certain governments would pay handsomely to learn about. Kenneth's mind raced through the implications. His old missions had involved regime changes, assassinations, and operations that had shaped the political landscape for the past decade. In the wrong hands, that information could destabilize entire governments. Have they made contact? Not yet, but they will. And when they do, you'll have a choice to make. Which is... Keith's smile was thin and cold. Come back to work for us, or spend the rest of your very short life running from people who want to torture state's secrets out of your head. The offer hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Kenneth understood the subtext perfectly. This wasn't really a choice at all. Keith was offering him protection in exchange for returning to a life he had tried to leave behind. What about my family? What family? Keith's voice carried a note of genuine confusion. According to our intelligence, Kenneth Witt's wife divorced him and took his children. They're living with some local businessman now. Kenneth realized with crystal clarity that Keith had no idea about the connection between Marcus Stone and Kenneth Witt. The surveillance team watching him thought they were observing a rogue operative conducting unauthorized operations, not a betrayed husband orchestrating revenge. My new family, Kenneth said carefully. The people I'm protecting. Ah, yes. Vincent Cowan and his household. Keith consulted his tablet again. We're aware of your current assignment. Corporate protection, right? Nothing that would interfere with your new duties. Kenneth nodded, mind racing through possibilities. Keith was offering him a way back into the shadow world, a chance to reclaim his old identity and power. But it would mean abandoning his revenge against Vincent, leaving his betrayers unpunished. Unless, what kind of assignments are we talking about? Kenneth asked. The usual, targeted eliminations, intelligence gathering, operations that require your particular skill set. Dangerous work, but the kind of danger you've always thrived on. And the surveillance team will be eliminated once you're back under official protection. Dead operatives tell no tales. Kenneth made his decision with the cold certainty that had defined his entire career. I accept, but I have conditions. Name them. My current assignment continues until completion. Vincent Cowan hired Marcus Stone for protection, and Marcus Stone honors his contracts. Keith frowned. How long are we talking? 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Depends on how quickly certain threats resolve themselves. And after that, Shepard 6 returns to active duty permanently. Keith extended his hand. Welcome back to the war, Ken. Kenneth shook the offered hand, sealing an agreement that would change everything. But Keith had no idea what war Kenneth was actually fighting or who his real enemies were. As the general and his soldiers disappeared back into the darkness, Kenneth pulled out his phone and sent a single encrypted message to Preston. Timeline accelerated. Require immediate asset deployment for final phase operations. The response came within minutes. Assets standing by. Authorization granted for terminal protocols. Kenneth smiled as he deleted the messages. General Keith thought he was recruiting a rogue operative back into government service. In reality, he had just provided Kenneth with the resources and authority to complete his revenge against Vincent Cowan with official backing. The irony was perfect. The United States government was about to fund and authorize the destruction of the man who had stolen Kenneth's family. Phase 3 was about to begin, and this time there would be no survivors. Chapter 8. The Reckoning Unveiled. The transformation of Kenneth Witt into Marcus Stone had taken weeks of careful preparation. The transformation of Marcus Stone into something far more dangerous took exactly 48 hours. Kenneth stood in the bathroom of his rented house, watching his reflection change as skilled hands worked with professional-grade prosthetics and makeup. The man in the mirror was no longer the weather contractor or the polished security consultant. This was Shepard 6 in all his lethal glory, cold eyes, predatory smile, and the kind of presence that made hardened killers step aside. Facial recognition will read you as a completely different person, the technician said as he packed away his equipment. Bone structure appears changed, eye color shifted. Even your gait will skin differently thanks to the orthotic inserts. Kenneth nodded, studying the stranger in the mirror. How long will it hold? 6 hours under casual observation, 2 hours under close scrutiny. Long enough for whatever you're planning. The technician left without another word, carrying his equipment and any evidence that he had ever been there. Kenneth was alone again, but now he was armed with more than just surveillance equipment and professional skills. General Keith's authorization had opened doors that Marcus Stone could never have accessed. Military-grade weapons, surveillance technology that could penetrate any security system, and most importantly, a team of operators who asked no questions and left no traces. At 1800 hours, Kenneth received the call he had been waiting for. Package is in position, Preston's voice reported through the encrypted channel. All assets standing by for your command. Copy that. Initiate surveillance protocol alpha. I want eyes on all principals. Roger. Be advised, there's unusual activity at the primary location. Subject appears to be hosting some kind of family gathering. Kenneth felt his pulse quicken. Specify. Multiple vehicles, including one registered to a Kenneth Witt. Appears to be the ex-husband. The world seemed to stop. Kenneth stared at his phone, mind racing through implications. Kenneth Witt, his own legal identity, was at Vincent's house, which meant someone was impersonating him or semi-live video feed. Now, the encrypted video stream appeared on his phone within seconds, showing Vincent's mansion from multiple angles. Kenneth recognized several cars in the driveway, including his own battered pickup truck. Through the living room windows, he could see figures moving about, and his blood turned to ice as he recognized one of them. It was him, Kenneth Witt, looking exactly as he had the day Charlene destroyed his life. Flannel shirt, work boots, the defeated posture of a man who had lost everything. But Kenneth was here, in his rented house, transformed into someone else entirely. Preston, he said quietly, I need immediate intelligence on the individual claiming to be Kenneth Witt. Stand by. Jesus Christ, Ken. Facial recognition confirms it's you. But you're standing right there talking to me. How is that possible? Kenneth's mind raced through possibilities until the truth hit him like a physical blow. Someone had been studying him long enough to create a perfect double. Someone who knew about his connection to Vincent Cowan and was using that knowledge for their own purposes. The surveillance team that Keith mentioned, Kenneth said, they didn't just identify me. They've been studying me, learning my mannerisms, my speech patterns, everything needed to create a convincing duplicate. Why? Kenneth watched the video feed, seeing his double interact with Charlene and the children with perfect familiarity. Seeing Lori run to embrace a father who wasn't really her father. Because they want Vincent Cowan alive, he said with sudden clarity. They know I'm planning to kill him. So they're staging a reconciliation between him and Kenneth Witt, making it look like the wronged husband has forgiven his wife and accepted his new situation. That makes no sense. Why would they care about Vincent Cowan? Kenneth zoomed in on the video feed, studying the scene more carefully. Vincent was there, playing the gracious host to the man whose family he had stolen. Charlene was serving dinner, the picture of domestic harmony. Jason and Lori seemed genuinely happy to see their father again. But there was something wrong with the picture. Kenneth's trained eye caught details that others would miss. The way his double shoulders were too straight, the way he held his coffee cup with his left hand instead of his right, small inconsistencies that spoke of careful preparation but imperfect execution. Because Vincent Cowan isn't their real target, Kenneth said quietly. I am. They're using my family as bait to draw me out, to force me into a situation where I have to reveal myself. The general's offer was part of the trap. Keith isn't trying to recruit me back into government service. He's trying to flush me out into the open where his real employers can take me. Kenneth felt the familiar ice-cold clarity that came with absolute danger. He had been outmaneuvered by professionals who understood him better than he understood himself. They had studied his psychology, identified his weaknesses, and crafted a trap using the one thing he couldn't resist, his family. What are your orders? Preston asked. Kenneth studied the video feed one more time, watching his children laugh at something their fake father had said. They looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way they hadn't since the divorce. Even knowing it was an illusion, even understanding the danger, he couldn't bring himself to shatter their joy immediately. Maintain Overwatch, but do not engage, he said finally. I'm going in alone. Ken, that's suicide. You'll be walking into a crossfire with no backup and no exit strategy. Maybe, but those are my children in there, Preston. My real children. And whatever game these people are playing, it ends tonight. Kenneth ended the call and checked his weapons one final time. The Sig Sauer P226 in his shoulder holster, the backup Glock at his ankle, the ceramic knife that wouldn't show up on any scanner. Not enough firepower to fight an army, but sufficient for what he had to do. He looked at his transformed reflection one last time, then smiled with cold anticipation. Whoever had orchestrated this trap had made one critical error. They had underestimated exactly how far Kenneth would go to protect his family. Tonight, they would learn the difference between studying a predator and facing one in the wild. Tonight, the real Kenneth Witt would meet his doppelganger, and only one of them would survive the encounter. The war was about to reach its bloody conclusion. Chapter 9, The Final Gambit. Kenneth approached Vincent's mansion with the predatory grace of a wolf closing in for the kill. Every shadow was a potential hiding place for hostile forces, every window a sniper's perch, every sound a warning of approaching death. But he moved forward anyway, driven by something stronger than tactical wisdom, the primal need to protect his children from whatever game was being played in that house. The security system he had installed for Vincent's protection now worked against him. Motion sensors tracked his approach, cameras recorded his every step, and pressure plates in the driveway announced his arrival to anyone monitoring the feeds. But Kenneth had designed these systems himself, which meant he knew exactly how to defeat them. He reached the side door, the one entrance he had deliberately left with minimal coverage, and used his master override codes to disable the alarms. The house's security system went dark for exactly 90 seconds, long enough for him to slip inside undetected. The sounds of family conversation drifted from the dining room, punctuated by Lori's bright laughter and Jason's deeper voice as he entered adolescence. Kenneth followed the sounds like a moth drawn to flame, every step bringing him closer to a confrontation that would determine whether his family lived or died. He paused at the dining room entrance, studying the scene through the crack in the door. Vincent sat at the head of the table, playing the role of gracious host with practiced ease. Charlene was radiant in a way Kenneth hadn't seen since their early marriage, her face glowing with contentment as she watched her reunited family. And there, sitting in Kenneth's old chair, was his double. The resemblance was perfect. Same height, same build, same weathered hands from years of construction work. But Kenneth could see the subtle differences that marked this man as an imposter. The way he cut his meat with surgical precision instead of Kenneth's casual efficiency. The way his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging exits and potential threats even while maintaining conversation. This was no mere actor. This was a professional operative who had been extensively briefed on Kenneth Witt's life and mannerisms. "Daddy, will you read to me tonight?" Lori asked, her voice carrying the innocent trust that had been Kenneth's greatest joy and deepest wound. "Of course, Princess," the imposter replied, his voice a perfect match for Kenneth's own. Just like old times. Kenneth felt rage build in his chest like a nuclear reactor approaching critical mass. This stranger was sitting at his table, eating his food, receiving his children's love through deception and manipulation. Whatever intelligence operation was behind this, they had crossed a line that no professional should ever cross. "Actually," Kenneth said, stepping into the dining room with his hands visible and non-threatening, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The reaction was immediate and violent. Vincent's wine glass shattered against the wall as he jerked backward. Charlene screamed, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Jason and Lori stared in confused terror at the sudden appearance of what appeared to be their father's identical twin. But the imposter's reaction was the most telling. His hand moved toward his jacket with the fluid motion of a trained killer before he caught himself and forced a confused expression onto his face. "What the hell?" Vincent started to say. "Who are you?" the imposter demanded, rising from his chair with careful precision. "What are you doing in this house?" Kenneth smiled with cold amusement. "I'm Kenneth Witt. The question is, who are you?" "I'm Kenneth Witt," the double replied, but his eyes were already calculating angles and distances. "I don't know what kind of sick game this is, but prove it," Kenneth said simply. "Tell me Lori's middle name." The imposter's hesitation was barely perceptible, but Kenneth caught it. "Rose. Lori Rose Witt." "Wrong," Kenneth said quietly. "Her middle name is Marie, named after Charlene's grandmother, who died the month before Lori was born. But you wouldn't know that, would you? Because you've never been her father." Charlene's face had gone pale as winter frost. Kenneth, what's happening? How are there two of you?" "Because someone has been watching our family for weeks," Kenneth replied, his eyes never leaving his double. "Someone who wanted to use you as bait to draw me out of hiding." "Hiding from what?" Jason asked, his teenage bravado cracking under the weight of a situation he couldn't understand. Kenneth finally looked at his son, really looked at him, for the first time since the divorce. Jason had grown taller, his voice deeper, his face showing the first hints of the man he would become. But his eyes still held the trust of a child, the belief that his father would protect him from any danger. "From people who think I know things that could hurt them," Kenneth said simply. "People who don't care if innocent families get caught in the crossfire." The imposter made his move then, hand diving toward his concealed weapon with professional speed. But Kenneth had been expecting it, had been watching for the subtle shift in stance that preceded violent action. His own gun was in his hand, and aimed before the double's fingers touched steel. "I wouldn't," Kenneth said conversationally. "Not in front of the children." The imposter froze, hand half inside his jacket. "You're making a mistake, Ken. There are things you don't understand about this situation. Then explain them to me. Not in front of them." He nodded toward Lori and Jason, who were clinging to their mother with a wide-eyed terror of children caught in an adult nightmare. Kenneth considered this, mind racing through possibilities. The double was right. Whatever was really happening here, it was too dangerous for civilian witnesses. But he couldn't leave his family unprotected while he sorted out the truth. "Vincent," Kenneth said without taking his eyes off the imposter, "take Charlene and the children to the panic room I installed in your basement. Lock the door and don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "But Ken," Charlene started to protest. "Go. Now." The command carried the absolute authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed in life-or-death situations. Vincent herded the family toward the basement stairs, Lori looking back over her shoulder with confused tears streaming down her face. Daddy? Which one is my real daddy? The question hit Kenneth like a physical blow, but he forced his voice to remain steady. I am, Princess. I'll always be your daddy, no matter what happens. Once they were gone, Kenneth turned his full attention to the imposter. Start talking. My name is Agent Corey Ritter, CIA Special Activities Division. I've been tracking you for 6 months. Why? Because someone put $1 million bounty on your head. Someone who knows about your old operations and wants you dead before you can compromise them. Kenneth absorbed this information without changing expression. Oh, we're not sure yet. The contract was placed through intermediaries, but the intelligence level suggests someone with government connections. Someone who worked with you during your active years. And Vincent Cowan was never the real target. He's small-time. His money laundering operation barely registers on our radar. But when our surveillance detected you moving against him, we realized someone was using his situation to manipulate you. Kenneth's mind raced through the implications. Preston, your old handler. We think he's been compromised, possibly for years. The assignment he gave you, the authorization codes, even General Keith's recruitment offer, all of it designed to draw you out where you could be eliminated. The truth hit Kenneth like cold water. He had been dancing to someone else's tune from the moment he'd called Preston for extraction. Every move he'd made, every plan he'd crafted, had been anticipated and countered by someone who knew him better than he knew himself. How long do we have? Kenneth asked. They're moving tonight. Sniper teams in position, extraction units standing by. They plan to stage it as a murder-suicide. The jealous ex-husband kills his replacement, and then himself. Kenneth felt the walls closing in around him. And my family? Collateral damage. They can't risk witnesses to what really happened here. The cold rage that had been building for weeks finally crystallized into something pure and deadly. Someone had used his family as pawns in an intelligence game, had put his children in mortal danger to settle old scores from Kenneth's past life. That someone was about to learn the difference between hunting a man and hunting a monster. What do you suggest? Kenneth asked. Agent Ritter smiled grimly. We kill them all. Kenneth nodded slowly. For the first time since this nightmare began, he and someone else were in complete agreement. The war was about to end, but not in the way anyone had planned. Outside the house, in carefully concealed positions around the neighborhood, professional killers were moving into final position. They thought they were hunting a rogue operative and his civilian targets. They had no idea they were about to face 2 of the deadliest men alive, fighting side by side to protect the only things in the world that mattered to Kenneth Witt. His children, his family, his love, and he would burn the world to ash before he let anyone take them from him again. The final battle was about to begin. Epilogue. 6 months later. The courthouse steps were awash in autumn sunlight as Kenneth emerged from the building, legal documents in his hand and a feeling of profound closure in his heart. The divorce proceedings were finally complete, the custody arrangements settled, and Vincent Cowan was nothing more than a bad memory, slowly fading into the past. The events of that night 6 months ago had changed everything. The sniper teams that Preston had deployed never made it to their positions. Agent Ritter's backup had been more extensive than anyone realized. By dawn, 3 foreign intelligence operatives were dead. Preston was in federal custody, and General Keith was facing court-martial for his role in the conspiracy. Vincent Cowan had survived the night, but his world had not. The revelation that his house had been the center of an international intelligence operation had destroyed his reputation and his business empire. The car dealerships were shuttered, the construction company bankrupted by legal fees, and Vincent himself had fled to Florida with what little money remained. Charlene had taken the children and moved back to her mother's house in Ohio, far from the violence and deception that had nearly destroyed them all. The marriage to Kenneth was officially over, but the relationship between father and children was slowly healing. Kenneth waited by his truck, a new one this time, paid for with money earned through legitimate security consulting, as Jason and Lori emerged from the courthouse with their mother. Daddy! Lori ran to him with the unreserved joy of a child who had nearly lost her father and found him again. Kenneth swept her up in his arms, marveling at how much she had grown in just 6 months. Jason approached more slowly, the teenager's natural caution warring with his obvious relief that the legal battles were finally over. "So what happens now?" Jason asked. Kenneth set Lori down and looked at both his children, really looked at them, for the first time without the weight of betrayal and rage clouding his vision. "Now we figure out how to be a family again," he said simply. "It won't be like before, but maybe it can be something better." Charlene approached, her expression carefully neutral. The months since that terrible night had aged her, lines of stress and regret etching themselves around her eyes. "Kenneth," she said quietly, I wanted to say." "Don't," Kenneth said, not unkindly. "We're past the point where words can fix anything. Let's just focus on the children now." She nodded, understanding that some wounds cut too deep for apologies to heal. As they walked toward their separate cars, Lori tugged on Kenneth's sleeve. "Daddy, are you going to disappear again?" Kenneth knelt down to meet her eyes, seeing his own reflection in their innocent depths. "No, princess. Never again. I promise. Even if bad men come looking for you." Kenneth smiled, thinking of a new identity he'd been given, the clean slate that came with official government protection. Marcus Stone was dead, Shepard 6 was officially retired, and Kenneth was finally free to be nothing more than a father who loved his children. "Especially then," he said, "because now I know what's really worth fighting for." As they drove away in opposite directions, Charlene toward her mother's house, Kenneth toward his new life. Neither of them looked back. The past was buried, the debts were paid, and the future belonged to whatever they chose to make of it. Vincent Cowan had thought he could steal another man's family with money and charm. He had learned, too late, that some things can never be stolen, only earned, and Kenneth Witt had finally learned the difference. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.